Hello, good people. It's great to be back with you. There is something that has been going on in our little corner of the internet for a while, and that is some discussion about the relationship between dialogue and narrative, and which really rules, dialogue or narrative. There was a conversation a while back between Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke, and they were really favoring the idea that you could have dialogue without having overarching narrative, that having an overarching grand narrative was not necessary because the meaning would emerge from the dialogue. Now, I want to question that a little bit. I think Paul VanderKlay would say that it is the narrative that rules, and I would say so too. I think Jonathan Pajot would agree with me as well. But I want to give some examples of why it is that I think this is the case. I want to talk to you about a towel incident that happened in my house a number of years ago. So I had a couple of my grandkids were living with me, and I had some other grandkids that were over, and they were staying with me for a while. And so we had this whole passel of kids in the house, and I was getting kind of annoyed with them because of the way they were treating the towels. So they would use a towel and it'd end up on the floor of the bedroom. And then they would go and grab another towel, somebody else's towel that they had already used, and maybe they'd hung it up, or maybe they'd thrown it on the floor too, or they'd toss the towels in the closet with the dirty clothes. And they were bugging me with these towels. And I was emphatically telling them that they were all supposed to have their own towels and their own toothbrushes too. What's up with the kids using each other's toothbrushes? How gross. I swear children are so uncivilized. But anyway, they were, I was talking to them about this whole situation, toothbrushes, towels, the whole works, and how they had to have their own towels. I had different colored towels so they could each pick a color of towel. They were to hang their towels up to dry after they used them, and after they used them a couple of times, they could put them in the laundry, but not if they were wet. They had to be dry. And then they would get washed, and then they should put their own towel away. And they would know it was theirs because it was a certain particular color, and we were going to get all of this stuff sorted out. And as I was talking about all this stuff, I was cleaning up the linen closet and sorting everything out. And at one point I said very emphatically to all the kids, I said, everyone is to have their own towel. Do you understand that? You are to each have your own towel. One towel, your own towel, and not use anyone else's, just your towel. Okay, so I was saying these words to the kids, and it turns out that one of my older grandsons was sitting on the sofa. He had his phone in his pocket. And just before I uttered these sentences, he accidentally butt called 911. So the 911 operator answers the phone, and she hears me saying these sentences about the towels to the kids. And then he notices that his phone is on because he heard some sound or something. So he turns it off or closes out the phone call. Well, she calls right back immediately and says, this is 911. You just called 911. Do you have an emergency? And he's like, no, we don't have an emergency. I must have called you by accident. My phone was in my pocket. And then she says, I heard somebody talking about towels. Are you sure you don't have an emergency? And he starts laughing and he's like, no, my grandmother is just trying to get all of us kids to treat our towels properly. And she's cleaning up around here and trying to get us organized. And then she goes, is there an adult there? So he passes the phone to me and she says, ma'am, do you have an emergency in your house? And I said, no. She goes, you're not fleeing your house for some reason. No, everything's okay, really. I'm just cleaning out the linen closet and yelling at the kids about how they're supposed to treat their towels. And so she takes my name and number and, we get off the phone. Now, we were kind of lucky at that moment because I want to tell you about this grandson of mine. This grandson of mine might very well have answered the phone from the 911 operator. And when she asked him if he had an emergency, it would have been just like him to say, yes, ma'am, we have a serious towel emergency. You need to send the fire department right away or something like that, because he is just that kind of kid. One time he went to the airport with my husband. My husband was taking 2 or 3 of the grandkids on some kind of trip, and he went to the airport with my husband. Now, because of the child trafficking and stuff that goes on, they're alert in airports to people traveling with children. And they asked my grandson, "Do you know this man that you're traveling with?" And he said, "No, I don't know who he is." It was not funny, I will tell you. My husband was quite mortified and appalled that he was saying this. And he said, "No, I don't know him." And he kept the ruse up. The kid kept the ruse up for several minutes, to the point where they were separating the kids from my husband, and they were taking my husband, and they were questioning him very intently. And it took him several minutes to recant and to tell the truth, and then it was even another few more minutes before they would actually let my husband go, and that they were satisfied that he was actually their grandfather. I'll tell you what, that kid, he was quite the little scamp, and quite a perverse little sense of humor he had. So I said all this to just say, dialogue is nested in narrative, and it is by means of narrative that it acquires its moral import, and it evokes our judgment. So when the 911 operator was talking to me and asking me, she asked me, are you fleeing your house for some reason? And I said, no. It's because she's trying to create a narrative in her mind that would account for me, hollering at somebody about towels. And I guess she thought, if your house was on fire and there was smoke, maybe you would be putting towels over your head to run out of your house, or something like that. So that she was trying to make sense of what I was saying by placing it into some kind of narrative. And I had to give her an alternative narrative for her to understand what was going on, because dialogue is nested in narrative. It acquires its meaning from narrative, but it also can acquire its moral import from narrative. And this moral import that it acquires from a narrative is something that will provoke or evoke our moral judgment. So let me give you another scenario that would illustrate this. All right, well, let's say that a group of people are waiting at a bus stop. And among the group of people waiting at the bus stop is a man who is holding an umbrella, or he's carrying the umbrella. It's not raining, but he just happens to be carrying the umbrella. A second man crosses the street and comes up to him, seems to be coming up to him quite aggressively, and says, "There you are. I see you've still got my umbrella you borrowed from me a month ago. I think you should give my umbrella back. I might need it today." And he points to the darkening sky. The second man says, or the first man that was holding the umbrella says back to him, "Oh yeah, I think I'm just going to hold this umbrella hostage for my grill that you borrowed a couple of weeks ago for Mom's big party. Kelly had her team over to the house on Wednesday night, and she wanted me to grill, but I couldn't. So your sister had to cook up tacos for the kids in the kitchen." Then the man with the umbrella says, "Oh, I'm sorry that I disappointed my dear niece. I haven't been getting enough sleep, and I've been working long hours. The truck has some starting issues. I don't know if it's the battery, the alternator, or the starter. And I have been working such long hours that I haven't had any time to troubleshoot it and figure out what's wrong with it. But I'm off Saturday. I'll be able to take a look at it. I'll get it fixed, and then I can bring the grill over to you." Then the other man says, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll come over. We can work on the truck together, and I'll let Kelly help Sue out with the twins for a few hours. I'll bring the grill back to my house in my truck." So let's talk about that particular little scenario and conversation, and how and what our moral judgment is of it as we go through it. When we first see the man come up and talk about his umbrella and say, "Hey, you borrowed my umbrella a month ago," our moral sympathies are with the man who is saying that it's his umbrella. Because why? We place that into a narrative context that is something we know. What do we know? We know what borrowing is. We know what it is to give something back when you borrow it. We know that if you borrow something, you're supposed to give it back. We instantly have a narrative. Here's a man who borrowed something and didn't give it back. So our moral sympathies are with the man who wants his possessions back. But then when the man says, I'm going to hold it hostage because you borrowed my grill and haven't given my grill back, well, then instantly our moral sympathies switch. Why? Because we have a larger narrative that we place that in. We know that an umbrella costs just a few dollars, but a grill, that costs over $100. So to borrow something like that and not give it back, well, that's worse than borrowing an umbrella and not giving it back. But when the man starts talking about mom's party, we instantly know, okay, these guys are in the same family. Maybe they're brothers. And then when the man talks about your sister cooking for the kids, we think, oh, I see. These guys are brothers-in-law. And then when the man talks about his dear niece, talks about not getting enough sleep, his long hours, his truck being broken, then our sympathies are with him and we place him in the context. Here's a very busy family man, and he's working hard. We have sympathy. We realize a larger context of the story. We're building in our minds a narrative of that makes sense of their dialogue as they're talking. And then when the guy says that he'll bring his daughter over to help the other man's wife with the twins for a few hours, we think, oh my goodness, no wonder that guy's not getting any sleep. He's got twin babies at his house. And so what do we know? We know that babies keep people awake. And so we have a whole narrative now about their family life that we are able to take their dialogue and place it into. What is it that is controlling the meaning of what they're saying? It's not their dialogue, it's the narrative structure that we build from all of the other things that we know about stuff and about life and about families that we're able to use to for us to understand and interpret the dialogue that we hear them having. As they say more sentences, our picture of the narrative grows, and it's that narrative that we're actually using to interpret their dialogue. Dialogues are embedded in narrative. It is the narrative that controls the meaning. The narrative is the context that gives us what the dialogue means. Now, a narrative can become broken, and when it does, dialogues become incoherent. This was a point that was made by Alistair MacIntyre in the book After Virtue when he talked about the incommensurability of our moral statements to one another. Why are they incommensurable? Why are we not being able to have a coherent dialogue with one another? It's because our narrative structure is broken and we can't figure out what narrative we're embedded in. We don't agree on the narrative, and because we don't agree on the narrative, we're not able to have a dialogue with each other that makes any sense. Now, it is the dialogue, it is the narrative that rules, not the dialogue. When someone says something to us dialogically that sounds like it is taking the narrative in some completely weird direction, we'll often use a particular statement with them. We'll say something to them like, sounds like you've lost the plot, or we'll talk about them and we'll say they've lost the plot. An example would be people who talk about the United States and talk about our government and talk about the way that our society is to be run, and they say something like, what we have to try and achieve is equality of outcome. We instantly think, you've lost the plot. You've lost the plot here of what it means to be part of a democratic republic and to have a free market. Because you can't have equality of outcome and have actual equality and have actual freedom. So those people have lost the narrative of the building of the United States, which is a political narrative that is embedded in a narrative of all of Western civilization, going back to Aristotle and Plato. So I want to make the case here that it is narrative that rules, not the dialogue. And I think that I think there's good evidence for that, and I think there's plenty of evidence that when the narrative structure breaks, the ability for us to have coherent dialogue is also breaks. So those are my thoughts about that. You can tell me what you think in the comments. I appreciate your attention. Until we're together again, treat yourself as though you are someone you are responsible for helping, because you are responsible. So am I, and together we are making the world. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching or listening.